the Bible truly is a unique book. It just separates itself from all the others. While the other books may give you some really good life advice, other parts not so good, the Bible just hits the nail on the head. While other books may tell you stories that may or may not have happened, the Bible is consistent in its recollection of events that have come to pass. It's not only going forward into the future, taking you all the way through to eternity, but going back in the timeline to give you perspective on everything that has happened since creation itself. Now, with a scope this big, many people who trust in science have a very hard time coming to understand everything. They want to lean on their understanding of their own mind and think that science can explain everything. Science cannot even create wood. We have to open our minds to God, understanding things that we cannot. Now, as much as they would like to disprove the story of Jesus that he was a real person, they are unable to do so. As much as they would like to prove that Moses did not lead the Israelites out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea itself, they are unable to do so. The evidence is just there, and this happens time and time again. With what the Bible has documented, it is shown to have happened. And when you look into it, the Bible is quite a history book, documenting things like giants on this earth. Now, one of the most attacked accounts in the Bible is the account of Noah and the flood, the great deluge that wiped out all life on earth except for Noah and his family. So here we have another opportunity with a new evidence that has come forward to see the evidence for the Bible in the world around us. So let's start by looking for evidence for a great flood. Is there any evidence to suggest there was such a thing? Well, in about 200 cultures around the world, we find legends of a flood. They all date back to roughly Noah's time. They are sent by a deity or deities as an act of divine judgment. They're found on every continent and share similar themes. This is because it is believed Noah's descendants stayed together until God scattered their languages at the Tower of Babel, as shown in Genesis 11. Let's then look at the fossil record for any evidence of a flood. And we find very interesting things. We find sea life being fossilized on the top of Mount Everest. We find fossilized sea life in the Grand Canyon, in every single continent on Earth, and in mountains. Here are two videos that I've added to give credibility to the Genesis account.
Fossils tend to be found in distinct layers where there are very, very large numbers that have been destroyed, untold billions. And so every time we see a layer of rock that's this thick, we're thinking about an event that probably took minutes to make, not thousands of years, minutes for just this one package of rock, sometimes even seconds, where these pulses of water from the flood are moving over the continents, grabbing ecosystems or dragging marine ones up from deeper in the ocean and pulling them onto land. And as one gets deposited and the waves come back, they start pulling and piling additional stuff on top of that. And it's a graveyard on top of a graveyard on top of a graveyard. It's the sort of thing that speaks to catastrophe, not the sort of thing where the fossil record is gradually accumulating bone by bone, shell by shell, little by little, over untold eons of time.
Let me ask you this question, which is, why are you so interested in this biblical story as opposed to any other biblical story?
Well, that is because, first of all, Jesus believed in the flood model, and it's the basis for the entire authenticity of the Bible. If you can prove that the Genesis story is false, you have destroyed the entire belief system on which Christianity is based. So that's why we use this model to show people that Noah's Ark was real and that the story is true.
Well, couldn't the story have been symbolic, metaphor for other kinds of events that took place? How about creation? Couldn't that have been symbolic or metaphorical in the language that's there?
Well, it is possible, but when we look at the four postulates of creation and we compare them with the four postulates of evolution, only the postulates of creation have been observed. Evolution is based on four major ideas. None of them have ever been observed. Number one, that life comes from non-life. We have not one single example of life coming from non-life. Number two, that all the life forms that we have today came from single-cell life forms. Many people do not know that while we do have single-cell life forms that we call bacteria, we have no two-celled life forms. We don't have three-cell life forms. We don't have four-cell life forms. We don't even have five-cell life forms. That is, we go from single-cell bacteria to complex life forms. So there's no evidence that all life comes from single-cell life forms. The third postulate of evolution is that time and chance drive evolution forward, of course, and time works against evolution. The chance of one simple 100-unit protein coming together by accident this is a very big number. Time and chance make evolution absolutely impossible. The fourth postulate that evolution is based on is that what we see today, minor genetic variation in species, is evidence of macroevolution. So because cats are different colors, dogs are different sizes, that means that fish turned into cows. And of course, we know that that's not true because Mendel proved that all the genes that exist today, you can shuffle them around, but there are no new genes that were created. Let's think about the four major postulates of creation. Number one, where there's a design, there must be a designer. We see codes in DNA. Codes are evidence of intelligence because you have to translate from one language to another. We have not a single example of that happening by accident. Number two, that the Earth, the solar system, the universe, and the galaxy are young, measured in thousands of years, not millions or billions of years. Many times people ask me, they say, well, Major, you believe in a young Earth, a 6,000-year Earth. Can you show me that that's true without using the Bible? And I say, absolutely. What's the oldest living thing on the planet? The oldest living thing on the planet? Trees. How old are the oldest trees? 4,500 years. That takes us back almost exactly to the year of the flood, okay, in 2,500 BC.
Remarkable.
Number two, I'm saying, look at the sky. We call solar nebulae. A solar nebula is what we see from a supernova when a star explodes. It leaves a gas cloud. Because of our radio telescopes that we have now today, we can look deep into space and we can actually count the number of solar nebulae that are there. And how many are there? A supernova takes place about once every 26 years. How many solar nebulae do we have? 6,000 years worth. That's impossible in a universe that is billions and billions of years old. And we have other evidences such as alpha decay that we do in our program that most people don't understand that also shows that the Earth is 6,000 years old. So that's the second postulate that proves that the biblical story of creation is true. Life that we see today are the basic kinds of animals and plant life that were originally created. So we can test that. You can breed dogs, you can breed cats, but you can't breed cats with dogs. So there are limits to how far we can go. And lastly, that is, Earth experienced a worldwide flood in approximately 2500 BC, 1656 years after the world was created. The world is filled with limestone. Limestone is sedimentary rock. It precipitates out of water. The entire Earth was filled with water. Every mountain chain in the world, including Everest, has sea life on top of that mountain. The mountains rose out of the water, so we know that there was a worldwide flood.
Let me pose a question to you, and Mark and Lise, feel free to jump in this. And that is this. Most people who don't believe in God aren't card-carrying members of the Atheist Club. They haven't studied molecular biology.
Yes.
Why don't they believe in God? What is the struggle there?
Neil, I'm going to tell you, that's a very good question. My answer to that is probably because most of them has not actually seen the evidence that supports the Bible. And that is my job, to actually show them. You're right. Most people are somewhere drifting, somewhere in the middle. This is a war for ideas. And it's my job to combat these forces of error particularly in secular campuses and in universities, which is where I work and teach, and show that the evidence supports God's word. God is a God of science.
That's fantastic. Pose this question to you guys. Say someone grows up going to a Christian church. Say they have been surrounded by, a church community and pastors who preach sermons. Are there wrong ideas of God that exist? Wrong ideas of the Bible that exist?
Well, certainly they do exist, and they exist in church. Many people don't know that some of the largest religious denominations actually support evolutionary theory, and I'm really sorry to hear that. It is important that people test any church that they go to against the Bible to make sure that it is accordance with the truths of the Bible. Jesus believed in the flood story. And he said that he was coming again and it would be just as in the days of Noah. So if Jesus believed it, it's very difficult for me to understand how you could call yourself a Christian if you don't understand or accept the story of Noah's flood and the creation story. And of course, it's important to understand the science that goes along with.
You see that camera right there? There are people who are watching right now. There are people who are struggling with their faith in God. If you were to look at that camera right there and you were to talk to someone who was struggling, who is maybe a skeptic, someone wrestling with doubt, what would you say to them?
I would say, hold on. The evidence is there. God is interested in you. He respects who you are. If you read, if you study, if you seek him with all your heart, you will find him. He has promised you that. The evidence is there, and I am here to help.
Now, has anything like Noah's Ark been found? Well, there is a site in eastern Turkey that has been known for some time. It is called the Durupinar site. It has just recently become a military zone and is not open to the public any longer. Let's take a look at some of the evidence that this may be the Ark.
First, it's in the mountains of Ararat, as the Bible says. Genesis 8:4 says, "Then in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat." Notice that the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. It doesn't say it came to rest on the mountain of Ararat, as some claim. This means it came to rest in the region of Ararat. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the name Ararat, as it appears in the Bible, is the Hebrew equivalent of Uardhu or Uartu, the Assyro-Babylonian name of a kingdom that flourished between the Aras and the upper Tigris rivers from the 9th to the 7th century BC. It fits the general dimensions of 300 cubits long by 50 cubits wide by 30 cubits high. Its length is exactly 30 royal cubits, which is 515 feet long or 157 meters. Its width is larger than 50 royal cubits, which is 86 feet or 26.21 meters. The ruins today measure 138 feet or 42 meters wide. So what we see today is that the width of the ark is wider than what the biblical account says. However, this is explained by taking into consideration that the ark's walls probably fell outside as they decomposed and the ark settled down. So this extra width has been explained by understanding that the sides of the ark fell outward as it decayed, or also that the 50 cubits were an average width of the ark, not its width at its widest point.
When the boat came down from above and caught upon those rocks right there that you see in the middle, that tore its way into the heart of the boat and it pulled the timbers out from under this part of the gunwale. And it, of course, fell out farther than the rest. But this has rib timbers and metal brackets and everything in it to show that it's still a part of the boat.
3 distinct layers or decks have been discovered from different geophysical scans, ground-penetrating radars, and electrical resistivity images taken over the years. These scans reveal these layers only within the ship-shaped object and not outside of it. Now, an earthquake occurred in 1978 that lowered the sides outside the ark considerably. Images taken before and afterward clearly reveal a change to the sides of the proposed ark shape. Many believe the sides now reveal several vertical ribbed timbers used in the ark's construction. Ron Wyatt dug a 6-inch round shaft tunnel into the side of the ark-shaped formation and claimed to have found petrified animal dung, a deer antler, cat hair, human hair, and other fibers. Metal detector tests taken numerous times over the years all reveal a very distinct organized pattern of metal beneath the surface, which is consistent with the shape of a large ship. Also, 4 intact metal rods have been discovered by the Turkish government, each measuring about 4 feet or 1.2 meters in length. In June of 1991, an interesting object was discovered which seems to be a large rivet with a washer around it. It was believed to fasten the large timbers of the ark together. An analysis of the rivet object showed it was made of various metals such as titanium, aluminum, iron, and other metals. Interestingly, just centimeters away from this rivet-shaped object, the soil reveals no minerals of iron or metal whatsoever. Now, the Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that because of its chemical activity, aluminum never occurs in the metallic form in nature. It should be noted that the Bible affirms the knowledge and use of iron in Genesis 4:22 before the flood occurred. It says, "As for Zillah, she gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger," listen carefully, "of all implements of bronze and iron." So before the flood, they had use of iron. They were very skilled in all kinds of iron, so it shouldn't surprise us that within this ark-shaped object, we can find all this metal and iron deposits that are there. It should also be noted that metal is not found outside of this boat-shaped object. Just within the object is where the metal is detected. During a radar scan done by Ron Wyatt in the presence of the local Turkish government, something unique seemed to appear. The Turkish government ordered a soldier to dig up the ground, and a petrified piece of wood was uncovered. It was later tested and revealed it was indeed organic in nature and appeared to be 4 layers of wood laminated together. This is believed by some to be part of a deck timber. Even more surprising were laboratory analyses which not only revealed that the petrified wood contained carbon, proving it was once wood, but there were iron nails embedded in the wood. The Turkish government also claims they have found additional petrified wood on the site as well. As mentioned, John Larson carried out electrical resistivity tomography in 2014, which provides 3D images that are quite convincing that under the surface of the boat-shaped object are what appear to be different decks and structures of a ship. Researcher Andrew Jones, along with Applied Geophysics Department of Istanbul University, believe that the results of the scans indicate a man-made artifact beneath the surface that could well be the ark, and are eager to continue studying the location. The team believes that the new GPR data shows parallel lines and angular structures 8 to 20 feet down, and that these parallel lines and right angles below the surface are something you would not expect to find in a natural geological formation. The formation identified in the scans, according to the team, matches the dimensions of the Genesis description of Noah's Ark. Found in this area are around 30 of these drogue and anchor stones. They are found scattered along a path running from west to east. It appears as the waters were receding from the great flood, the drogue stones began hitting the land under the water, and then they were cut loose. The remaining stones are generally in the area where the ark eventually came to rest. Many of these stones have holes carved in them for connecting ropes from the ark to the stones. Some of the holes have broken over the years in some of the stones. So on the tops of these stones, they had holes in them, and the ropes would go through those holes, and then they were attached to the ark. These drogue stones were continually used in ancient times after the flood and can be found in places like Israel and the Nile River in Egypt. So these drogue stones were something commonly used in ancient ship sailing, and they were used as ballast. They were used as stabilizers to keep the ship stable and to keep it headed into the waves so that it wasn't tossed to and fro on the oceans. These drogue stones are over 200 miles from the closest ocean and about 5,300 feet or 1,615 meters above sea level. They have no business being here other than that a huge ship like the ark dropped them here. So they're a long ways from any water, and they have no business to be here other than that a large ship dropped them here. The numerous stones discovered near the Durupinar site are the largest ever discovered in the world. This would make sense as the ark was massive in size and would need extra large stones to stabilize it. Many of these stones have crosses carved on them from early Christians visiting this site, and others have crosses that are from the Crusader period from around 1200 AD. Some of the stones have 8 crosses on them, representing Noah and his family that were saved from the flood. Several of the stones have been used as grave markers as well. One of these stones has an ancient carving that appears to be the Tower of Babel. The 3 layers carved on this stone are believed to represent the 3 levels or decks of the ark as mentioned in the Bible. Another stone has unknown ancient writings on it that have yet to be interpreted and translated. All these carvings reveal that this site was venerated long ago and visited by religious people for thousands of years. Genesis 8:4 says, "Then in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat." But then Genesis 8:5 says, "And the water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible." Now this seems confusing as the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat 74 days before the mountains were visible. Now how could this be? Well, this becomes very clear when we understand and realize that the ark had drogue stones that were used to stabilize the ark. Now these drogue stones were massive stones that hung down under the ship and were used to stabilize it. They were used in ancient times and acted like sailboat ballast today. They created a drag in turbulent waters to prevent a ship from slipping sideways against the waves. In calmer waters, they were used as sounding mechanisms to find out how deep the water was, how far the land was below the water. Therefore, the drogue stones of the ark caused it to stop and rest on the mountains. Afterward, when the water level dropped, the ark touched down and sat on the land. So this explains why the ark came to rest. The drogue stones touched down and held it somewhat in place. Then as the water continued to recede and the mountains were visible, then the ark actually touched down on the land. Also, an ostracon was found by Dr. Bill Shea around 100 feet or 30 meters from the boat formation. An ostracon is a teaching tool made up of a piece of broken pottery that has something written or sketched on it that passes along an important story. On one side of the ostracon, as interpreted by Bill Shea, it has an inked-on drawing of a man with 2 birds. One is on his arm and the other is being released. Below it is a bird flying back that has a branch in its mouth. The other side shows a man with a mustache and beard. and has a hammer and spike in his hands. Shea interprets this as Noah likely building the ark. Now, Dr. Robert Michelson discovered an ossuary in 1998 above the Durupinar site that dates back to around 1600 BC, 900 years after the Great Flood. This would have been the time Noah's descendants inhabited the area. An ossuary is an item the deceased person's bones are put in and kept for long-term purposes. This was done only for very important people. There are also ancient relics one would expect to find at a site that has been venerated for thousands of years. And you can see here some interesting relics and shapes of objects that just attest that this area has been venerated for many, many years.
The ancient Mesopotamians, Sumerians, Babylonians, all those people, they wrote on clay. That was their natural activity. And clay tablets, which have impressions of writing on, are pretty good. They're pretty stable. You can handle them. You can't play football with them, but they're pretty reliable. But what happens in antiquity is there are wars and buildings collapse and fires and disasters and people die and they go away and other people come and trample on things. And when archaeologists find them, it is not often that an ancient inscription on a piece of clay comes to light in perfect condition. So this tablet, you can easily see that it's not complete. There's stuff missing here, there's stuff missing there, and it also looks like elephants have danced a polka over the surface because many of the signs are damaged or squashed. But nevertheless, this piece of cuneiform inscription is a remarkable thing. This is the oldest map of the world in the world.
For as long as anyone can remember, this has been a map with a central piece missing. But from today, no longer. Nicholas Glass reports on an unexpected moment of archaeological excitement in the British Museum.
The British Museum has boxes of tablet fragments, but it's only in the last 2 months or so, when Edith Horsley was first invited to work at the museum, that they began trying to sort things out.
Well, even as a child I was intrigued by the signs that are used in cuneiform, but it wasn't until I attended Irving Finkel's lectures that I became an addict.
As a volunteer, Edith comes in just once a week. She was asked to keep an eye out for any piece with a geographical or astronomical image on it.
I saw this quite small piece with this triangle on it and the signs inside, and I thought it was probably a map. So I put it in the little section where I put the pieces that I think are of special interest, because Dr. Finkel can't go through all of these trays, obviously. So I put those aside, and he became quite excited when he saw it.
She put aside a little pile of half a dozen pieces that didn't look like everything else, and I went through them one by one, and she said, look, this one's got some lines on it, and as soon as I saw it, I knew it must belong to this tablet, because, as I say, it's such an unusual thing. It's actually rather funny, because the map wasn't in its normal place, it was downstairs on exhibition. And so I got out an old photograph of it, and the photograph was at a different scale. So when I put the fragment on the photograph, I was sure that it must belong, but I couldn't quite see where it would fit. And it was only the following morning that I took the fragment downstairs to the exhibition where it's on public view. And by looking at the original tablet, I could see straight away that it fitted perfectly in the hole.
And it did. And as a matter of fact, when I put it in experimentally in the gallery in front of Edith, we couldn't get it out again afterwards. It was such a snug fit, and it had to go down to conservation to be dealt with properly and glued in position. So, having opened a bottle of bubbly and danced around in the gallery, the time came to think very seriously about what this meant, because the tablet is very famous. It's often reproduced in all sorts of different encyclopedias and books about ancient ideas and histories of maps, of course, and it's quite a famous object. And to make a join to that was an extraordinary thing. But then there was the question of what did it tell us? Against one of the diagonals, there was, in cuneiform, the expression, the Great Wall. I'm going to read you what the scribe tells us about this triangle. To the fifth, which you must travel 7 leagues. That means you have to row across the bitter river for 7 leagues before you can land at the foot of the mountain. The Great Wall, its height is 840 cubits. Its trees up to 120 cubits. By day you can't see in front of yourself. By night, lying on ... it's still broken. Then you must go another 7 leagues in the sand, and you must ... because there's always ... because nothing is perfectly preserved. But the important thing is, we now know which of the triangles goes with the description of this gigantic wall. As a result of Edith's discovery, we've got 3 of these triangles in a row. And that is a great boon, because you can imagine, if you have isolated triangles, trying to match them to the description on the back, it's very difficult to get anywhere seriously and reliably. But when you've got 3 in a row, all you have to do is to find 3 descriptions in a row, and it stands to reason that you'll be able to somehow match them up. And that is what we did. And the discovery was very clear once you realize that the counting was anti-clockwise and not clockwise. So number 4 says, to the 4th, to which you must travel 7 leagues, because it's like a kind of fairy tale. Everybody knows it's always the same introduction. So each time you have to travel 7 leagues across the water. Then it gets a bit broken. Then it says, you see something which are as thick as a parsictu vessel. This parsictu measurement is something to an Assyriologist which makes their ears prick. And the fact is, it's only once otherwise known from cuneiform tablets. And it's rather an interesting cuneiform tablet too, because it is the description of the ark which was built, theoretically, in about 1800 BC by the Babylonian version of Noah. And in this account, the details are given, and the god says you have to do this, this, and this. And then the Babylonian Noah said, I did this, this, and this. I've done it. And I made these structures as thick as a parsictu vessel, he says out of his own mouth, in the original story. So this word parsictu is like a kind of noise. It immediately locks in to this thing on the map. Immediately and incontrovertibly. So what it means, speaking plainly here, if I may speak plainly here, is that if you went up this mountain all the way with your sandwiches and breaking regularly for lungfuls of fresh air, eventually you would see against the night sky or the dark sky of the outer universe, silhouetted the ribs made of wood as thick as a parsictu vessel of the wreck of the Babylonian ark, which, like the one in the Bible, came to rest on a mountain. And if you come down the mountain and cross over the water back to the homeland, the first place you come to is called Urartu. It's drawn on the map. Now the interesting thing about that is that in the Bible, Noah, in his ark, landed on a mountain where the name is Ararat, and Ararat is the Hebrew equivalent of the Assyrian Urartu. That's quite a meaty thing, quite an interesting thing to think about, because it shows that the story was the same, and of course that one led to the other, but also that from the Babylonian point of view, this was a matter-of-fact thing, that if you did go on this journey, you would see the remnants of this historic boat which saved all the life of the world for the long-term future, from which we, of course, profit today, still there in the crags against the dark sky.
Wow. Wow. Did you just catch what he just said? This shows that the story of Babel is legitimate. There was one flood. It's the same flood. If we look on the map and we look where Babylon was, and we use the Euphrates River as our starting point, as our guide, you go north with a slight east tilt, you are hitting Urartu, you are hitting Ararat. This is the ark